and then we'll get started. All right, let me pin myself. I'm going to pin Alex. And let's go. All right, so as I mentioned, Alex is with us today. He's really going to be driving most of this. I am just here, to moderate and do intros. But Alex is a tremendous resource for everybody in the pro housing space around just figuring out, what's the temperature check on policy, what are different things that are working in different states or localities. And his latest research really centered around single-stair buildings and how to get over all of these concerns. This is really how Alex has described it to me, is the first time anyone has actually gone through the data and said, what can we actually find out about, are single stair buildings actually less safe? Or is this just perception? So we're really excited to go through this and figure out how to kind of involve in our advocacy, whether you are, a straight YIMBY advocate or somebody who's working in the industry. And just level setting as to why this research is so important. In most places in the United States, like probably 98%, single stair buildings cannot be built, even though they are proven to be very scalable, very cost effective, and kind of the perfect example of gentle density in the wild. And mostly this is because folks come out with perception and concerns around fire safety, not being able to get out of a fire in case something, God forbid, happens, or folks end up adding different concerns that end up boiling down a bill that becomes unuseful. But Alex's research is debunking this. So that's the good news. Before I turn it over to Alex to dive into slides, I'm going to just ask him to share a little bit around, in an early conversation he and I had, like the bigger picture with single stair. It can feel like a wonky topic. It can feel like something that's in the weeds, but Alex, I really like how you kind of framed it around how single stair buildings can actually save lives. Could you kind of share that scene setting before you get started?
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. Nice to be here. And I should flag that all of the research that I'm presenting today is joint work with Center for Building in North America. And Stephen Smith, who leads Center for Building in North America, was the mastermind who figured out the methodology here. And also that there are a lot of people who have been working on this issue longer than we have, Stephen among them, but Sean Jersnick is on the line here today for the call as well. And that the reason this has, I think, taken off is that people can envision a small lot or a store. And why can't you just build apartments above the store? Why can't you just build apartments above the restaurant? Why can't you build an apartment building on this 30-foot wide lot that is infill and has been vacant for a decade? And it turns out, right, the reason is because you can't fit a second staircase and a corridor connecting the two staircases on every level of the building. So it's kind of visually intuitive, but it turns out that this can make a big difference in enabling a lot of apartments. And so some fundamental research was done with the Boston Foundation and the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, finding that there are so many lots in the Boston area where a two-stair building is just too big to fit, but a one-stair building could fit. And so the housing potential here is quite large. And also one kind of political flag right off the bat is that not every state has local building codes. So in some of them, the building code is either driven primarily at the state level or exclusively at the state level. And because the local municipal league or League of Cities and Towns is frequently the biggest opponent of reforms at the state level to allow more homes, this is one that they're not always fighting. They're not always against it because sometimes they see the building code as being in the state's purview and not the localities. And so that can also make this a much easier political lift than some of the other reforms that have faced entrenched opposition from trade associations for local officials.
I was actually surprised. When Alex and I were initially talking, I wasn't sure if in California, for all California friends on the line, if this was a state decision or local, and it's actually local. LA this week has been starting to work through its own single stair reform. So I think that's, something for everyone. If you don't already know, is this a local or state decision? Like, I think that's a really good first step into these waters. But Alex, I'll hand it over to you to share a little bit about your research, which will include also, just for so everyone's on the same page, like what single stair buildings are and all that good stuff. And then yeah, we'll leave about at least 20, 25 minutes for chat and discussion.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. And Courtney had alluded to this, but before we get started, wanted to flag that I think the costs of sprawl are known to everyone who's on a YIMBY Action call. But the cost of sprawl can also be life or death, because road deaths in the US are a lot of deaths. Deaths from homelessness in the US are really a lot of deaths. And so decisions about fire safety have sometimes driven whether we allow homes at all. But because the ideas around fire safety are sometimes driven by how things were 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, that's why it made sense to reinvestigate this topic and whether it's actually dangerous to allow one staircase instead of two. And so we used methodology that Stephen Smith had developed at Center for Building in North America to investigate this topic, looking at jurisdictions that in fact have allowed one staircase. And so with that, let me go ahead and share my screen and switch over to slides and see if I am deft enough to go to the slideshow view. Well, I don't know how deft that is, but I mean.
You did it.
Got it. All right. All right. So Courtney alluded to, kind of gave you an overview and go through a couple of basics here, but we're looking at a one stair layout versus a two stair layout for buildings. And so you can see on the left, you've got a two stair layout, and that means it's going to be a hotel style apartment building with a big corridor down the middle. You probably won't get the ice machine, but it's a kind of a hotel layout. And so you have to have a corridor down the middle. So that means unless you're lucky enough to have an end unit, then you're going to have windows on only one side of the unit. So different style, architecturally, maybe not as interesting, but also much less flexible. So here's some examples from Seattle of single stair buildings. Seattle has allowed single stair buildings of 4 to 6 stories since 1977, while almost all the US only allows single stair buildings up to 3 stories. So here are 3, and these are all on pretty small lots where a 2-stair building couldn't fit. So they've been able to do infill, and you could say, hey, they could have gone up to 3 stories in another city. Maybe. I mean, A, that's fewer homes, but B, a 3-story building isn't always going to be financially viable. And so by going up to 6 stories, it's possible that the whole project works. And then if you'd gone to 3 stories, you would have gotten no homes if it weren't viable to build. But if you can go to 6 stories, different story, right? You can get 23 units on the left, 22 in the center, 10 on the right. That's small lot housing. So because they fit on small lots, you can get Main Street revitalization too. So traditional main streets have taken a hit. Retail vacancy rates are high. Office vacancy rates are high. But if people can go downstairs, instead of driving 5 miles, maybe they don't shop online and they go to a store instead. They go downstairs and go to a restaurant or a bar and don't need to drive there. So we could be looking at something that is helpful for Main Street revitalization, including in rural areas, by enabling traditional small apartment buildings on main streets or above retail, above restaurants. Overall, no secret on this call that the US has an enormous housing shortage, estimated at 4 to 7 million homes, but we're actually getting many fewer small apartment buildings than we used to. Building codes are absolutely a reason why. Building multifamily housing has gotten a lot more expensive over time because of changes to building codes. And that means small buildings may not work at all. And so if that's the case, then you could end up with none of them. And you can see this real drop off in the share of housing that is small apartment buildings of 2 to 19 units. So looking specifically at single stair, we got estimates from contractors. How much does it cost to build a small apartment building? How much does it cost to build a staircase? Well, staircases are really expensive now in multifamily buildings. You think of a stair in a single family home, it's probably made of wood. It is probably about 30 inches wide. You're not talking about fire rated walls. You're not talking about sprinklers. You're not talking about fire resistant door and an enclosed stairway with doors at the top and the bottom. In a multifamily building, a staircase is completely different. A stairway is just a different beast in a multifamily building, and it's one of the most expensive parts of the building on a per square foot basis. So allowing one of them instead of requiring two can shave 6 to 13% off construction costs for a small building, which can be the difference between it happening and not happening at all.
Especially right now, I feel like what we're hearing from developers is right now in a lot of jurisdictions, they want to go and do the smaller projects. They're more viable right now from a financing perspective, or they're, a pathways to get it through. So, single stair, I feel like because it naturally reduces costs is another way to get more housing built now, given all of the financial constraints that we're seeing in the US today.
Absolutely, because big buildings are more sensitive to interest rates because they involve more borrowed money, but especially more investor money. And the equity piece of the capital stack for building multifamily housing is the most expensive. And so if this is a small building that's a few $1,000,000, it's probably going to be less sensitive to the interest rate environment than a big building that involves less borrowed money and less investor money. So fire concerns, right? There's really only one major pushback to allowing apartment buildings, the small apartment buildings with one staircase. When I say small apartment buildings, we're talking about something that's generally up to 4 units per floor, up to 6 stories. So fire concerns. This is the reason. This is the source of pushback. And the chief opponent of allowing single stair construction is generally the fire service in states and cities when it comes up. So we're going to look at the top where you see an allowable floor plate for a 2-stair building. Units up to 250 feet from the stair. And you see a football field in the middle for a reference. And then on the bottom, you see a single stair building. So this is the max allowable Seattle floor plate. 4,000 square feet is becoming kind of a norm. There are several bills in states this session that would legalize single stair construction with up to 4,000 square feet of floor area per floor. So you can see in the dual stair building, you can be 250 feet from the stairs. In a single stair building, you would never be more than 20 feet from the stairs. That's also written in state laws sometimes, so that you're required to have all units have a door within 20 feet of the stair. So we're talking about a much shorter travel distance. But also, look at that note over on the right. If you're only talking about 6 stories with 4 units per floor, and 4 of them are on the ground, you only have 20 units of people using that stair. In a dual stair building, you can easily have 100, 150 units of people using each stair. So evacuation will necessarily be faster in a single stair building than in a dual stair building. None of this is to say that dual stair buildings are bad. They're not, but we should allow a greater diversity of housing types and enable a wider variety of homes so that more can come online and people have more choices. And that would improve housing affordability. In a single stair building, you just won't have more than 20 units of people using that stair versus 100, 150 units of people using a stair in a dual stair building. If you've got 300 units in the building, it's 150 units of people using each stair. So evacuations will be and are faster in a single stair building than in a dual stair building. So as we're thinking about fire safety, this is a little complicated. I think there's intuition off the bat, a dual stair building must be safer. Immediately we can tell there's some reasons why a single stair building might be safer than a dual stair building. Well, the big one though is modern safety technology. Things are not the same as they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago. So you can get smoke spread down that long hotel style corridor in a dual stair building that you would avoid in a single stair building because you don't have long corridors and all the units are within 20 feet of the stair. So you've got a quicker exit, but also you don't have the same potential for smoke spread that you would get in a dual stair building with a long corridor. Now, talking about modern safety technology, sprinklers, right? Sprinklers weren't in apartment buildings a few decades ago, and now they're universal in new apartment buildings. Fire-rated walls. Self-closing doors are probably the unsung hero of fire safety in apartment buildings because it's kind of a cheap intervention, but very effective. If somebody runs out of the unit because there's a fire in their apartment, a self-closing door contains the fire to the unit. That's an effective intervention, but sprinklers, enclosed stairways, fire-rated walls, self-closing doors, this is good fire safety technology. And so we see in data from the Netherlands that actually in single stair buildings have a lower share of fire deaths relative to rescues. This is the second set of columns from the left, the red and the blue. The red column is lower than the blue column, indicating that we're talking about a lower share of fire deaths in single stair buildings relative to rescues than in other housing types. As far as we can tell, this is the only data from another country looking at fire safety outcomes in single stair buildings versus other housing types. And single stair buildings have better fire safety outcomes in the Netherlands than other housing types, possibly for the reasons we've already discussed about smoke spread and ease of evacuation.
Alex, one question we had in the chat regarding kind of technology and the idea of like, is a double staircase needed for something? Kathy had asked, she's heard in her community that it may be the case that firefighters are trying to say they need one staircase to funnel smoke and another to funnel evacuations. Is that true? Is it standard? Is that a fair argument? Any thoughts on that?
So that is not how rescues work and how firefighting simply works. So by having fire-rated walls and doors and sprinklers, people can shelter in their unit in the event of a fire. And firefighters have relayed to us in meetings that in sprinklered buildings, they see almost no fire deaths, and that fires are generally out in sprinklered buildings by the time they get there. But we don't have an orderly system where kind of firefighters go up one stair and residents go down the other. If they were, that second stair is really far from some residents. In that building I showed you, you could easily be looking at a 550-foot distance from a unit to the second stair if the first stair is blocked. But there's no communication system in place to tell people to use one stair while the firefighters go up the other. And because the stairs are so far apart from each other in a big building, residents may not even know where the second stair is if they're used to using the elevator and they're aware of the one that's near them. So that is unfounded, but also evacuations are simply faster in a single stair building. So the likelihood of a building not being fully evacuated by the time firefighters get there would be much lower in a single stair building where evacuations are just much faster.
Thanks. In the one other question that we had come in for the Netherlands comparison, can you talk through the data around single stair versus traditional multi-stair? I think that's probably the third set of columns in.
Yeah, the third and fourth. We'll be talking about other apartment types. And so overall, the Netherlands has a fire death rate that's less than 1/3 the fire death rate in the US. So just to set a baseline, we're talking about a country that has a very low fire death rate, much lower than ours, even though they don't use sprinklers as widely as we do, and they have single stair allowed throughout the country. But you can see that the ratio of fire deaths to rescues is not as good in other apartment buildings in the Netherlands, in those third and fourth columns, as it is in single stair buildings, which is the set of second columns, because the ratio of deaths to rescues is not as favorable, with the red line being higher relative to the blue one than it is in the single stair buildings. In the US, even though we really focus a lot on fire safety in multifamily housing, we should note that the rate of fire deaths is actually lower in multifamily housing than it is in single family housing. If you look at the note down at the bottom, there are actually 1.5 times as many Americans who die in vehicle fires each year as who die in apartment fires. So one of the advantages of reducing vehicle miles traveled and enabling people to have choices in how they get around rather than only using cars is we could actually reduce fire deaths, but they would be vehicle fire deaths, which are a lot more common than apartment fire deaths. So in the US, the cost per square foot to build multifamily housing is much higher than the cost per square foot to build single family housing. And that's true in Canada also. In Germany and Italy and in Mexico City, you can see in the right, that's not the case. There are real economies of scale from multifamily housing. Maybe one HVAC system. People are sharing stairs, right? Not every household has their own set of stairs, but there are real benefits, economies of scale from multifamily housing, but we're losing out to the diseconomies of scale from multifamily housing in the US by making it so expensive to build multifamily housing. But this kind of higher cost per square foot of apartments is not a law of nature, right? This doesn't come from physics. This is the building code. And the building code is making it so expensive to build multifamily housing, even though a lot of the changes in the building code are to increase fire safety. But as we'll see a little bit later in the presentation, fire safety is already better in multifamily housing than in single family housing. So this is probably counterproductive at this point to keep raising costs of building multifamily housing in the name of fire safety. Overall, go back to 1980, apartments and single family homes had the same rate of fire deaths. You go forward over time, and actually, right, you see that the risk of death per fire is 27% higher now in single family homes than in multifamily housing, because overall apartments have been getting safer over time, and single family homes have been staying about the same, which is not to say we should make it more expensive to build single family housing. That would be a mistake. We have a housing shortage, we need more homes. But when jurisdictions block multifamily housing, they're blocking housing that is safer and can improve people's lives and increase life expectancy in several ways, one of which is fire safety. Part of what's going on is just that the housing stock is so old. And tenant-occupied housing now has an average age of 43 years. That's really old housing. And the reason is just that we're not building enough. So housing that should have gotten built over the last decade and hasn't gotten built means that there's a lot of old housing that is still online and being used. And now let's move to the star of the show, New York City and Seattle, the only two US cities that have a large number of modern single-stair buildings. We hand-coded all the fire deaths in New York City over the past almost 12 years. And we see that there were 3 in single-stair buildings and 465 in other buildings. Controlling for the number of people who live in these buildings and time, the fire death rate was 5 per million residents per year for single-stair buildings, and it was 5 per million residents per year for other housing types also. So identical fire death rate, but the 3 fires that occurred in single-stair buildings in New York City, the 3 fire deaths that occurred in single-stair buildings in New York City were not related to egress from the building at all. Tragically, all 3 residents died in unit. This is how most apartment fire deaths occur. And so having a second staircase or a third staircase just would have made no difference whatsoever. In all 3 of those fire deaths, the fires did not spread beyond the unit of origin. It occurred in unit, and so residents did not escape from the unit. And so there would have been no benefit. So we can confidently say that in New York City, reviewing more than 600,000 occupant years of experience in these comprehensive data sets, and we merged the 2 big ones to make sure we weren't missing any, 0 fire deaths occurred because of a lack of a second staircase. Moving on to Seattle, there was 1 fire death in a single stair building versus 41 in other buildings. Exact same situation. The death occurred in unit. It was not related to egress from the building. The fire did not leave the unit of origin. So because the fires didn't spread and residents did not make it outside of the unit, again, we can confidently say the lack of a second staircase was not responsible for any fire deaths. So we've got the two cities that have a large number of single stair buildings, and there were no fire deaths over this entire period related to the lack of a second stair. All of these countries I'm showing you here on this chart allow single stair for 4 to 6 story buildings, and they all have a fire death rate that is less than half of the US. That's not to say they have lower fire death rates because they allow single stair. That's possible because it brings newer housing online. It's possible. But if single stair were actually dangerous, there's just no way we would see these results. That countries that allow it have a fire death rate that is less than half that in the US. I'm going to move on to some material that is not in the report, but we're going to have a companion piece out in a couple months looking at fire death rates in the US overall. And modern multifamily housing is the safest. So let's look at Colorado here, covering fire deaths over the last 4 years, which we hand coded. Single family housing is 73% of the housing stock, but 87.7% of the fire deaths. Old multifamily has a lower fire death rate than single family, but new multifamily built in 2000 or later, that's 11% of the housing stock, but only 3.5% of the fire deaths. Right, this is what we would expect if sprinklers work, if fire-rated walls work, if self-closing doors work, enclosed stairways that are non-combustible, and they do. But this is an argument for legalizing more apartments, making it easier to build apartments, because you know about all the other benefits of economic growth and economic opportunity, reduced sprawl, environmental benefits, reduced segregation, but also improved fire safety by making it easier to build modern multifamily housing. Let's go ahead and look at Wyoming. I had to review 12 years of data because Wyoming doesn't have a lot of people. And 85% of the housing stock is single family, but it's 90.5% of the fire deaths. And same relationship, a lower rate of fire deaths in older multifamily buildings and the lowest rate of fire deaths in new multifamily buildings. 5% of the housing stock, 1.6% of the fire deaths. And we're going to go ahead further and look at Virginia. So 79% of the housing stock, single family, but that's 99% of the fire deaths. Older multifamily, 13% of the housing stock, only 1% of the fire deaths. New multifamily, 8% of the housing stock, no fire deaths in the 2 years we reviewed, 2022 and 2023. So let's look at this example from New York. You can see an apartment building on the left, then 2 older single family homes on small lots next to it. A fatal fire occurred in the small single family home on the left. You can see it's boarded up in the middle. And because New York City allows single stair construction, these older homes, which are single family and were not as safe, can safely be replaced by single stair buildings. So this gets more housing online, but it also improves fire safety because it enables modern multifamily to get built. Final sum up. So, right, New York City, we've got the same fire death rate in single stair and other housing. Netherlands, it's actually better. These cost less. We're talking about reducing 6 to 13% off construction costs. You get better ventilation because you get multiple windows on multiple sides in the units because you're not constrained to that hotel-like layout. And you can get more natural light too with windows on multiple sides. Family-sized housing is a benefit of single-stair construction because you're not limited to studios and 1 bedrooms for most of the units because you've got flexibility in the layout, windows on multiple sides. You can fit them on infill lots in existing cities and towns and revitalize rural main streets by building over stores. And they're safer because you get they're modern multifamily, and all modern multifamily is safer than other types of housing. And in places that allow single stair, there have been no fire deaths in the time period we reviewed in New York City and Seattle related to the lack of a second staircase in the thousands of single stair buildings that we covered.
You covered a lot, Alex, in about 15 minutes. So congrats to you, and thank you for you and the extended team for doing all of this research. I think it's, it's been where we've been able to work on policies and get it passed. It's been, tremendous. Um, Before we kind of dive into the politically, how do we make this happen? Does anyone have any other questions on the data itself or questions for Alex related to his research? You feel free to use the raise your hand feature or pop it in the chat. One question we did receive, Alex, is there a max floor plate for a single stair building?
So right now, New York City uses 2,000 square feet, but they're looking to raise that to 4,000 square feet. Seattle uses 4 units per floor.
Okay.
And the most common floor plate being in-state bills that have been introduced this session, and there have been a lot of them to legalize single stair construction or evaluate it, is 4,000 square feet. There are bills that could go up to 6,000, but 4,000 square feet per floor is easily the most common set of dimensions being discussed.
Awesome. One of the questions we just got from Kathy, which I think is like, from our discussions has been the underpinning, like, wow, this is such an important message. You can be on single stair. Are modern single family homes safer than older single family homes? I would assume yes, just as modern multifamily is just better than older stock single family or multifamily. Is that's correct through all of your research, right? That we just need more modern buildings to improve safety overall, it seems.
So I see Bailey Thompson is on the call also.
Yeah.
We have not looked at whether modern single family homes are safer than older single family homes because we have not, that's just not something we've looked at. So given improved technology and kind of electrical wiring and codes, you'd expect so, but that's not something we've evaluated. But Bailey, if you have any information on that, feel free to put it in the chat.
I think the bigger message around the fact that we, in order to really improve safety, plus get more people housed, we just need newer, more abundant, modern multifamily housing. And I think, that's something where we don't see that that is often the lead argument that the YIMBYs are even using, right? Like from a safety perspective from that angle. But I think, this research around fire deaths and safety overall seems to, really serve as a reminder that we should be including that if they're particularly where there are communities where the housing stock is even older than the average in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right, there have been a lot of arguments made that are right for like why we should allow more homes and the benefits of having enough housing for everybody, right? But here's another one. And so the fire safety concerns are sometimes a reason why more housing is not allowed. But I think this evidence is compelling, and we're going to be publishing more of it this spring that we didn't share today. That making it easier to build and getting more housing online saves lives directly on the fire front.
Yeah. Two questions we got also on floor plate. Is there a limit that you suggest based on your research for floor plates?
So we haven't evaluated buildings larger than 4,000 square feet or taller than 6 stories. That doesn't mean they aren't safe, but we can only prove they are safe up to 6 stories and up to 4,000 square feet.
Okay. I'm going to read this next question verbatim because I don't have the technical knowledge, but you might. Along with single stair and limits to floor area per story, are there changes to construction type? 6 stories per CBC would require a type 1 podium and then type VA or 3 over.
Okay. So Seattle builds in wood, right? So Seattle builds in wood and New York doesn't. And they both have a good fire safety track record. So this can work with a variety of construction types in the US because these are going to be sprinklered buildings anyway. And they're going to have self-closing doors and fire-rated walls and enclosed stairways. It's going to be safe either way, whether you're building in wood or you're building in concrete or steel or mass timber. And so I don't think it would make sense to restrict the construction type to just say non-combustible materials or certain types of materials if the buildings are sprinklered and otherwise have modern safety features.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the policy work that's happening to get more places to do this, like in New York or Seattle. Overall, where have you seen, success in policies being proposed at the state or local level? And, are there any, call outs that you would give on those policies?
Yeah, sure. So there are single-stair bills moving this session.
Yeah.
Right. So Montana, I think, has gotten the furthest because their bill has cleared Senate committee, Senate floor, and House committee, and it's going on to the House floor. So that's probably the furthest along. But bills in New Hampshire and New Jersey have cleared committee. Bills have been introduced recently in Texas and North Carolina.
Yeah.
Colorado bill has cleared House committee, and so there are a lot of bills moving, and that makes sense because this works. It's a way to get more housing online, and it increases safety. It doesn't decrease it, including local action. So Memphis just legalized single stair in the past month or so, and bills have taken steps in Austin and Los Angeles as well.
Yeah, we were excited to see our LA chapter has been working on the single stair there, and they were really excited to see that move forward. And I think that again is a reminder to check to see if this is something you can move on the local jurisdiction or if it has to happen at the state. I was surprised in California that it can happen at the local, so more power for us, especially as YIMBYs, to keep it moving and keep these policies going. It's something that we track. So if there are any representatives from our local YIMBY Action chapters on the line and you're working on single stair, make sure that you tell your chapter manager about it because we're trying to see, what's working where. One of the things that Alex and I discussed around policies is this idea that, the bill can start out great, as we all know with most housing policies, and then fire service and others can kind of introduce what we were talking about as poison pills. And that the legislators don't often know what those poison pills are. So they just keep saying yes to it, even though it's becoming ineffective. Can you talk about what some of those poison pills are and how do you combat them?
Yeah, so there are some poison pills that can make single stair construction not viable, even if it's passed in name only. So for example, having extra wide stairs adds a lot of cost. Normal stair width for a multifamily building is 36 inches. And if you expect to have more than 50 occupants using the stairs, then 44 inches. Going wider than that is a major cost driver because it reduces the rentable space in the building. And remember, we talked about how expensive multifamily stairways are to build. And so having wider stairs ends up being a big cost because once you go to 48 inches or 54 or even wider, then you're adding more space to a very expensive part of the building, which is the stairway, and losing rentable space in the building itself. Another problem can be if you could only build in, say, non-combustible materials, steel, concrete, or possibly steel, concrete, or mass timber. Those are more expensive. So it's possible that you're not going to get buildings at all because you can already go to 3 stories with light wood frame construction. And so it may not be worth it to go to 4 stories or 5 or even 6 if you have to use more expensive materials to go up that tall. And also there are other possible poison pills. If you can only do this in areas that have, that have a certain fire department accreditation, maybe not many places have that accreditation. And also then you lose the benefit of rural Main Street revitalization.
Right.
If you can only build these in cities, and because they increase fire safety, those policies are self-defeating in terms of actually making people's lives better. But you could actually pass a single stair bill, which is not workable because of the materials required are really expensive, or the wide stairs make the building uneconomical, especially if you're restricting where they can be built.
One of the other things that we've seen happen, which again happens a lot with housing law, is you propose they reform and then gets reduced to the study bill. This happened in Virginia with single stair last legislative session. Hopefully, your new data will really help as states, if they are moving it to a intermediate step of doing a study. But are there other things that you would suggest for folks who are trying to combat this? Do we need to study it first? Thing that often comes up.
Look, a few years ago, we didn't have that much evidence, and what was there, right, was from other countries which do genuinely build differently, even though their fire safety outcomes are so good that it was indicative even then that the single stair was safe. At this point, I'm not sure what else there is to gain from a study because, I mean, this was a doozy, right? This took Pew and Center for Building in North America about a year to do, and that's why we did it, because we knew this would be a challenging study to do otherwise, and so we're glad to have it out there. I'm not. I mean, I'm not sure what else there would be to study. I was part of the Virginia Single Stair Working Group that conducted the study in Virginia, and there wasn't much original data, brought to the table in that group. So I hope that other places that look at this do incorporate outcomes like this. But given what we know, it's safe to proceed to legalizing this type of construction, at least up to 6 stories and 4 units per floor.
Awesome. A couple other questions came in about the specifics of, the tech specs of the building. A big question that we should address is around ADA and universal design. How are single stair buildings addressing this? Like, are units that are accessible going on the first floor, or are those units going to, off-site buildings that are fully accessible?
So whether you have one staircase or two, if you have trouble with stairs, you have trouble with stairs. So, right, I mean, it's hard to see what the benefit is of a second stair. If someone has trouble with stairs, it would make sense not to need them in the first place. But having only one stair could mean that maybe you could fit an elevator because there's budget left for it or there's space left for it. And we're seeing a lot of buildings that are 4 or 5 stories for smaller buildings that don't have elevators at all for different reasons, because elevators are very expensive to install in the US, pointing again to Stephen's research at Center for Building in North America. And so having one stair could make a building more likely to have an elevator, which is really what we need. If you have trouble with stairs, I don't know what a second stair gets you.
Yeah, very true and a good reminder. Another question came in around, have you seen anything around for single stair buildings being able to support larger apartments? Thinking about, apartment sizes that can support, families or above, and thinking about, what would a developer have to change in a single stair building in order to be able to accommodate that, other than fewer units, maybe.
Yeah, and I'll point to great work from Sean Jersnick and SAR Architects. And Sean noted in the chat that it does make it easier to build family-sized apartments if you have one stair, because then you get the flexibility in how you lay out the building, and you're not constrained to putting units just on one side of a corridor. And that means you can get multi-bedroom layouts much more easily and configure rooms to be the size you want, rather than the dual staircase and corridor design driving the building in much the same way that parking mandates sometimes drive building design, because then the building gets designed around how much parking you can fit rather than around what people need. And so you end up in the same situation here, where if you can do one stair, then you can have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom much more easily and have all the units clustered near the stairs. But by getting windows on multiple sides, you just get so much more design flexibility.
Yeah, that's awesome. A couple other things in the chat. A lot of people are calling out if they are working on single stair locally, which is awesome. So it looks like we have San Francisco folks who are working on it. We have Bend, Oregon. I know there are people from Chicago on the phone. I bet they're probably working on it. Um, if you are working on single stair policy, feel free to pop in the chat just so we have a record of it in case you also want to get connected with your YIMBY friends on this. Other question for you, Alex, around, how do we make these policies actually go through and get passed? Has there been anything else, prior to this research being out there that you found is helpful in getting these policies to move forward? What do the lawmakers need to kind of have to feel good about voting for something like this?
Yeah, so I think that look, the fire safety concerns are genuine. But that's really been the only holdup so far. And so if we can address those, the rest speaks to itself, right? Who wouldn't want more family-sized units? Who wouldn't want better light and ventilation? And also a situation where people can encounter their neighbors more easily and where the buildings fit better into the neighborhood because you're not constrained to a large boxy design, and where you can have more mixed use because that makes all the difference. People want to be closer to the places they go every day. Nobody likes long commutes, and people like having options, and this can create more of them. So I think the policy, once people even get a few minutes with it, kind of speaks for itself. But there has been this overarching concern about fire safety that has held back the development of single-stair buildings because not many places have legalized it yet. But look at Tennessee, right? Tennessee passed a law last year to authorize jurisdictions to go ahead and do single-stair if they want to. And right off the bat, Knoxville did it, Jackson did it, Memphis just did it. I think there's a lot of appetite if policymakers are confident that it's safe.
Yeah, normally at YIMBY, when we are talking to our advocates on the ground, like we often will say, don't try to throw stats at people and, death by data. This feels like one of the few examples where the research is going to be far more compelling than a personal story about why single stair matters. That being said, I think single stair is a wonky topic. And if you're trying to get somebody who's newer in the pro housing movement to understand it, I do think you have to talk about the walkability and gentle density and all that good stuff. But when you're in front of a policymaker right now, it feels like, thanks to everyone who did the work on this research, this is really what you need in hand rather than the more touchy-feely things that oftentimes we lead with when we're talking about pro-housing policies.
Yeah, that's right. Look, the benefits are what matters, or what matters most, right? And so absolutely the walkability, the mixed use, letting people shorten their commutes, letting people live closer to where they go every day. But then, right, that like the fire safety data is, I don't know how we move forward without that. And so the evidence from other countries is good, but now that we've got domestic evidence, and we also can see that modern multifamily is the housing type with the best fire safety, that it's not just that, this is safe or it's worth the trade-off. This is safer because it's modern multifamily. And if we can get more modern multifamily housing built, we can save lives because people will drive less and they'll have fewer car accidents. More people will have homes, and homelessness is deadly. But also just we will have fewer fire deaths if more people are allowed to live in modern multifamily buildings.
Yeah. Two questions came in that are the chat is on fire, and I hate to make that pun, but I don't know what else to say at this point. So speaking of fire service, have you seen any successful examples of getting local fire service on board in positively endorsing these changes? And I mean like the full-fledged changes, not the versions with the poison pills.
So study bills, I mean, right, but study bills are a step forward, but don't get more housing built right away. There's been some support for those if fire service is explicitly included in those studies. Yeah, it's been some openness in New Hampshire and in Maryland. But overall, look, we just put out this report a month ago, and
Yeah.
right, I think it's okay for fire service to take a little time to
Yeah.
digest the new information. But given this new information, and we are going to have a follow-up with some of the material I showed you about the lowest fire death rates occurring in modern multifamily housing. I hope that there's openness to taking a data-driven approach to fire safety because that can save lives.
Yeah, my hope is that, if we can regroup and, 6, 9 months after a lot of legislative sessions have closed, like let's see if there has been, or just in your one-on-one conversations, like, is the tide changing a little bit when it comes to the fire service's view on all of this? Um, a question around, uh if you're trying to do this reform locally, we have somebody who is on the planning board for a small Bay Area city. Strategically, do you wait to see if San Francisco and LA or the state pushes for this, or do you just go at it on your own? My inclination is like, I don't know. I
Oh
feel
no,
like
that's
you
just
kind of
a
just go
footnote.
after it on your own, but maybe you have a
It's
different
both.
opinion, Alex.
So you can.
I think, I mean, other people here are gonna, or will probably have opinions that are at least as informed as mine. But look, this is safer anywhere than other housing types. So I mean, I don't know why other largest jurisdictions would need to go first. We didn't include it in the presentation today, but we did check and see if New York City and Seattle have kind of unusual special fire departments. And by metrics that they report to the U.S. Fire Administration, they're pretty normal, right, in terms of kind of factors like response time. And this is safer to do in small jurisdictions too. Look, this isn't going to make sense in places that have septic and well, right? It's going to make sense where there's water and sewer. So in these smallest jurisdictions, it may not make sense anyway for infrastructure reasons. There may not be many buildings anyway going over 3 stories, but this is safer than other housing types. So including it in small jurisdictions is perfectly safe. And
Yeah.
strategically, I don't see why a large jurisdiction would need to go first, because sometimes small jurisdictions think like, well, large jurisdictions are special. They've got big fire departments,
That's my fear, that
right? It's
they're
not
gonna be
for
like, "We
us,
don't
it's for
wanna be
them.
LA. We don't wanna be San Francisco." Like, we hear that all the time.
Right. But this can work anywhere. By anywhere, I mean, it's probably not going to work with septic. So it makes sense with water and sewer.
Yeah. You touched on this earlier, Alex, but is there any reason why single stair could not work for taller than 6 stories, or is the research just not there?
Oh, it definitely could work. I mean, some countries go to 10 stories,
Hmm,
go to 20 with single stair. It absolutely could. We just have only studied up to 6. So we
okay.
can't prove it's safe above 6. But I mean, Singapore had the lowest fire death rate of any country I put on the screen before, and they allow high-rise single stair.
Wow.
Right. So there's no reason it couldn't work with a tall building.
Okay. Well, we're wrapping up for our last couple of minutes, but I want to make sure that we're asking too, Alex, how we can be helpful for you. Part of it, I think, is getting this report out there, spreading the word, using it in conversations around policy. But is there anything else that, the developers and architects on the phone, plus the advocates, could be doing to really support this work and make sure that it's getting out there in meaningful ways?
So, right, please share widely. We're glad to testify in front of state legislatures, and we do so on this topic and others when bills are introduced in states. But because fire safety has been the kind of the main reason why this hasn't gone further already, we hope that having information out there about fire safety will help advance the issue.
I'm excited to get everybody out there sharing it. I'm going to share all of these resources with everybody who was on the call or who registered and couldn't be here. I will also share it out to our very large 6,000-ish person Slack community to get it out there. And then another thing coming up around single stair that I wanted to mention is a single stair design competition that YIMBY Action is co-sponsoring with a bunch of others. Let me put the link in the chat. Um, so if there are people on the line who are thinking about, what could a single stair building look like and have design examples that they want to share and potentially get some recognition for, I believe submissions are due at the end of June. But there is definitely a lot of movement on this topic. People want to see the innovative designs. People want to do the policy work to move it forward. You can kind of just see just by the people who are supporting this competition. We have everybody from, Arnold Ventures, who's a very large funder in the housing space, to individual pro housing groups from YIMBY in California, YIMBY, to Build Casa to everybody that is all the way to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. So it's something that hopefully, if we're all doing this work together to one, get Alex's research and the team's research out there, but also to do the work to get the policies passed, we're going to start to see these move. It'll be, I think, interesting to get back together, like I said, in the fall and see where we're at with all of this.
And I wanted to note Jeff Evans is on the call today too, and Jeff was nice enough to review this report for us before he published it. So thanks to him. And also, I missed a question from Damien about wildfires,
Oh,
about
yes,
LA
sorry about that.
and Lahaina. So wanted to flag that one more way that these can reduce fire danger is by making it easier to build in low risk areas.
Hmm.
And so that people don't get pushed into high risk areas, into fire prone areas, into sprawl, into the wildland urban interface. And by making it easier to build in low risk areas, we can improve fire safety that way too, by enabling people to live in safer places and not living in fire prone regions.
Thank you for catching that. I apologize, Damien, I didn't read it. Um, well, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you to everybody on your team who worked on this for the Center for Building. This is phenomenal. Hopefully this is like, there's not many silver bullets when it comes to getting pro housing policies passed, but this definitely feels like it could be one. So thank you for your time today and sharing all of this. And I will get all of the research and the recordings out to everybody today. So thanks everyone for being here.
All right, thank you.
Bye, Alex. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Courtney, everybody.